All right, we are on air. Happy September, everybody. It is September 3rd, Thursday, Backdrop Day. And we're just going to do a quick review of items that need to be covered for Backdrop the community and Backdrop the project. Nate is feeling a little under the weather today, so he won't be joining us, but hopefully he doesn't have measles or some horrible outbreak-related illness. I don't know what it is, but he'll be fine. All right, so general announcements. As usual, we have PHP Storm licenses for Backdrop contrib developers. So if you are working on Backdrop contributed projects, send an email to info@backdropcms.org and we can send you a license. Those are good until February. I'm thinking about reaching out to the PHP Storm folks and seeing if we can get a batch of new ones that are good for a year again instead of just a few months now that we're running out of year here. So those will be a little more useful to people. We also have been contacted by the organizers of Drupal Camp Utah, which is in February 2016. And they don't have anybody in their small community who's working with Backdrop yet, but they want someone to speak on Backdrop at their camp. So they've reached out to us and said, please make announcements and let anyone know that we do have scholarships available. We can fund up to $500 towards your travel. And if you're sent by a company, they're happy to be to list your company as a sponsor on their camp website. They also wanted everybody to know that Utah has the world's best skiing, and there, if you wanted to do a little trip in Florida in February and get some skiing in, that might be a really fun thing to combine with the Drupal camp. So, put your thinking hats on to what you want to be doing next February, and if you think you're going to need a little break, that might be a fun thing to do. We have no updates from the PMC this week. Things seem to be business as usual. But in the community growth area, we've had a ton of activity in the last week. We have 146 total projects for Backdrop. There's 5 new ones since last week, which is pretty exciting. And we have 71 projects on backdropcms.org, and there are 9 new ones since last week. So I think it's a combination of a couple things. I know, Andy, you've been porting like crazy, which is fantastic. I started a client project where I've been porting a bunch of modules as well, but I think the biggest thing is that we got the modules, themes, and layouts pages up on backdropcms.org, and so people who had projects wanted to start creating official releases so that they would appear there. So I think that's why we have 9 new releases all of a sudden, which I think is very exciting. So good job. Thanks, Boss, for helping get those done. Thanks, Darius, for doing all of that stuff. And yeah, I'm excited to see things moving forward. Andy asked how Radix is doing. I'm using Radix on my client site right now, and I have run into, I contacted Arshad, and he's been super responsive in the issue queue, which is fantastic. I did find a couple of little issues, and I think we should sort those out before we make an official release. But we've basically cleaned up 2 or 3 problems with layouts and 2 or 3 problems with the theme, and I think so far it's looking fantastic. So that should be imminent, getting those up there soon too. So I'm very excited about that. We still have 38 Backdrop contrib authors, but I know we've gotten a couple of new people in the last week because people have been emailing via our website asking about where to find documentation and how to port modules and stuff like that. So I'm hopeful that we will have a couple of new applications here in the near future. So thank you, everybody, for giving Backdrop a shot. Until we have all of the processes clearly outlined, using the contact form is great because that'll help us figure out where we need to add more documentation. I contacted Arshad asking him to create an official release, and he's like, do you have any documentation on how to do that? And I was like, actually, we don't. That could be useful. I mean, we talk about it in this meeting every week, but if you miss the meeting, you're out of luck. So I added a new page on the API site that talks about how to make an official release for your project, since I tried to do it and I did it wrong. Like, that's definitely something we need to get out there publicly available. So hopefully that'll help people. Okay, infrastructure tasks. So we have update checking working for Backdrop CMS. There's a couple of follow-up tasks we need. We want to add feature usage tracking as opposed to just which version of Backdrop people are running, so we can figure out like which core modules they have enabled or disabled, and if they're using clean URLs, and maybe even get some data on which field types are actually in use, especially if we end up shipping with a bunch of these field modules enabled. it would be nice to know if people are using them or not, and that'll help us inform decisions in the future about whether things should be added or removed from core, because we're trying to meet the majority use case, so we need some numbers to know what our majorities are. I went ahead and created a couple of new issues this week on the backdropcms.org issue queue for all of the remaining items that we've been talking about in this weekly meeting, so that if anyone wants to kind of jump in on backdropcms.org stuff, there's a nice list for that. We don't have to rely on these Google Docs. So special feature checking for project usage is issue number 99 over there. And I also added issue number 98, which was hooking up charting. That's something that's not going to be super useful, but I really, really like the charting that they have on Drupal.org that'll show you project usage over time, as well as charts on issues. So you can say how many issues are active and how many issues are closed, and it'll give you an idea of how much work is getting done on the module and how often. So I think, as we start collecting that data, we'll start to have something that it will be more interesting to model and chart. And over time, I would love to get that charts solution integrated so that we can see that in Backdrop as well. Okay, project browser, which we are going to remember to talk about this week. I think the server's up. Last week we had an issue with paging, so that when you were looking at the browser in your application, instead of getting a certain number with a pager, that wasn't working correctly. I don't know if any progress has been made on the paging since last week, but that is still, I think, what is preventing progress on the core issue of getting it in. I would like to mention really quickly, we're going to talk about this later, but how we have this cycle where we've had 2 releases where we add a bunch of new features, and then the release we're going to have in January is going to be a user experience cleanup release. I think it would be fantastic if we can't get this project browser in 2 weeks, which is feeling really soon. Actually, it's a week and a half. I would love to get that in the user experience release. I think it's going to make a really big difference for Backdrop. And I also wanted to mention that I think this is probably a good move for us long term if we can adopt a pattern of doing 2 feature releases and then a user experience release. And that way we can kind of always stay on top of making sure as many user experience issues get attention as new features, because some of the times the new features we're adding are really big and really hard, and that means that all of our focus goes into something like getting rich text editing in core, and then we miss the little things. And I think if we can have a couple of releases where we focus on the big things and then one where we focus on all of the little things, it'll help make sure that we kind of create a better product long term. So I've been, now that I'm using Backdrop, I notice all these things, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to complain about that, and I realize I've already complained about it, and there's an issue, and sometimes there's a patch, and I'm like, oh, well, we just forgot about it because we were busy working on rich text editing. And I know that there's a lot of stuff like that in Drupal land too, where there's just so much going on, it's hard to keep track of everything. So I think having specific user experience releases is going to be huge for us. Okay. So, a little divergence there. Back to things we're working on for infrastructure. Drush is something that I took over a couple of weeks ago. I got it half working. I got it kind of working to the point where I figured out why it wasn't working. So it does some things. It's able to bootstrap Backdrop, but I can't get it to run any of its commands like clearing caches or anything. So I'm going to spend a little bit more time on that. I have, now that I'm building sites with Backdrop, I am experiencing the pain of not having Drush, and so I'm definitely looking forward to getting that working today so that I can get back to using it tomorrow. So that should be fun. I have a plan. I just need to actually get to it. Our flagship website, backdropcms.org, currently has modules, themes, and layouts, so people can find them there, which I think is great. We have a couple of follow-up issues based on adding those in the last few weeks. One of them is trying to clean up our top-level navigation. We've gotten feedback from a couple of different people that it's a little bit weird to have a top-level item like handbook followed by a top-level item called modules, and there's not a lot of explanation as to what modules is and why it's a top-level item. So what we were thinking about doing is adding a drawer, just like the handbook has a drawer where you can click on something like extend backdrop, and that'll slide out, and then in there you can see all of the categories where we can extend Backdrop, like modules, themes, layouts, and potentially in the future we could have distributions or libraries or whatever other things people end up creating for Backdrop, and it'll help kind of organize the site in a way where, yes, modules are really important, but having them in some kind of context might be useful. So I think we even have an issue, or patch in the queue. I'm not sure if there's a patch. There's definitely an issue in the queue, and there's some screenshots about how it should look and work, and some discussion going on over there. And I think that's going to be a good improvement. I'm not sure we'll get that done by the time 1.2 comes out, but we'll see. I think it will be nice because we'll have a flurry of activity of people looking at 1.2 when it comes out, and it'll be great to get that primary navigation cleaned up by then too. Other plans we have for the Backdrop website include setting up a showcase so people can show off the sites they're building with Backdrop, adding a services listing so you can find companies or people who are building you websites or modules or whatever it is you need for Backdrop, designs, information architecture, training, everything Drupal has, Backdrop will eventually also need, and we need a place where people can say that they're interested in doing those things. So we should set that up. We also would like to do a jobs system, much like Drupal has a jobs system, where if you have a Drupal job or you're looking for someone to hire, other way around, looking for a job, we could post them all in a central location. I think initially we won't be charging for that like Drupal.org does. I think we should just kind of make it a little more Craigslist style. But still, providing that service I think would be really useful to people. And also events calendar, so that rather than having to subscribe to an iCal feed to find out what events you can go to learn more about Backdrop, we can just list all of those events directly on our site. And in order to get people to do things like post their websites, post their jobs, and post events they might be hosting, we need to also let people log in to the primary Backdrop website. So before we get to any of that, we're also going to add single sign-on with GitHub. And then people will be able to use the accounts they're already using for GitHub, click a button on the Backdrop site, and get in really easily. But if you aren't a developer and you don't have a GitHub account, you can also create an account like you would normally do on Drupal.org or anywhere else. And that way it'll at least feel like people are joining something. So we can start to kind of create this sense of community by joining our official website, which I think is not to be overlooked in terms of getting our community going too. So more fun stuff coming for our website in the future. So for Backdrop CMS the project, we have the next bug fix release is 1.1.4. I don't think we have anything currently in the queue. We did notice one bug related to batch operations, and I also found one bug related to the way that we're handling attributes in the field template. I think we should try and get those fixed. It looks like there's another issue here queued up for the next release, which is a bug in Backdrop set message being missing from admin pages, and that's because we removed the system settings form that used to do that for us. But I think nothing here is so horrible we need to do it today and get it out there, any security releases. I think this should all be in line for let's get all these in and get them done before 1.2 and then include all those in 1.2. And there's nothing super horrible that's hard to fix. Everything I think here already even has a pull request. So that's fantastic. And then we have for 1.2, the built-in rich text editor is in. The follow-up issues for inline images is also in. So we're looking really good for inline image handling in rich text editing, which is really exciting. I've been using it on the site. I've been working on this week, and I've got it turned over to content creators now. So hopefully I'll be getting a lot of painful feedback, and hopefully if there's any issues that really need to be addressed right away, we can get those into 1.2 as well. I know there are a bunch of little follow-up issues on user experience, like don't tell people to enter HTML tags if the HTML tags they're going to be entering are going to be escaped and printed as HTML instead of as the text they want to see. But I think those are all pretty minor, and any of those could go in after 1.2. It would be great if we get them in before, but it's not a blocker in any way. The email field module is also looking really good. We have a final pull request that several of us have reviewed, and it looks fantastic. I think it's ready to be committed and can go in any time. The link field module is slightly more complicated than email field. I think it's also looking really good. A couple of people have tested it. It also seems to be working as expected. I have both of those modules in use, also getting turned over to content creators next week. So hopefully a mass flurry of general non-backdrop experienced people will also be coming in on those. But they look really good. Well, they work just like they did in Drupal and Backdrop Contrib. So I don't think there's any concern about those getting in for 1.2. The date module is a little bit more complicated, and that's because we had to remove a couple aspects of the date module from Contrib and Drupal 7. We removed date repeat. We moved all of the stuff from date API into core. There's a couple of other little tasks, like we can update the post date field on nodes to use the date form API element, which would trigger a pop-up for inputting dates in a way that's a little less painful than typing in strings. There's just a bunch of little tiny minor things that need to be updated, in addition to ripping out all of the stuff we're not supporting. Like there's some date repeat stuff built right into date that we don't need if we don't have date repeat. And then once we've got all of that ready, I think we're going to need some more extensive testing on dates for core. So that is looking a little iffy for 1.2. But it's pretty close, so I think, with everything else being kind of done already, we might be able to squeeze that one in. It depends on, if we do some initial testing and there are some problems, that might delay it. But if we do some initial testing and everything looks fantastic, then I think we should be fine. So we'll see how that goes. However, if date does not make 1.2, we can definitely push that to 1.3, even though it's supposed to be a user experience release. I think getting date in there, because it's already almost done, is not going to be a lot of work. I think it'll be fairly straightforward to just say, okay, we need more review, or we need to fix this problem, or we need to fix the tests, or whatever it is, and get it scheduled. There's a couple of other little things that are currently slated for 1.2 that are minor user experience things that I think would be great if we could get in. There's stuff like adding transliteration to core. If we don't get them in, it's not going to be the end of the world. I would much rather put our effort into getting date in, and we could add things like transliteration and redirect module functionality and stuff like that could go in 1.3 as well. So there's stuff that's currently earmarked for that milestone that we may not get to, but it's not mission critical. So if you really are passionate about redirect functionality, you can do that and it'll get in. If not, that's fine. Okay, so issues for 1.3, and these are just what we currently have on the list. There's a whole handful of layout follow-ups that include cleaning up the user experience, adding some features that were not included in the initial port of layouts, making sure that we could get stuff like a field block that would represent any field on any entity type that we could drop into any region. That would be great. There's a workaround right now. I'm using views, right? You can build a view that pulls out a field and drop it in. That's totally fine. But I think if we could provide that utility without making people build that view, that would be huge. So that's also kind of user experience related. So we'll get all of those in then. We also have our rich text editor follow-up. So anything we don't get to for 1.2, we'll try and get in 1.3. And then there's a handful of little modules that Drupal 8 had included in core that I think Backdrop also wants to get in. Things like cleaning up the menu administration UI, things like making sure all of our admin pages are using views. And these are things that we've all kind of started on in Backdrop. I think it would be nice just kind of wrap them up and get them done. Also, things like adding transliteration module to core would fit in really nicely with that too if we don't get it in 1.2. I've also added a couple of things to the 1.3 milestone that have been bothering me as a site builder, and I would recommend if anyone else is going through the same thing as you're building websites and you're finding things where you're like, oh, that's always bothered me in Drupal, I'd love to see that cleaned up in Backdrop. Add a comment in the issue queue saying you want it to be added to the UX milestone, and we can put them all in there. I think it would be good to have everything in the milestone and then kind of evaluate, like, okay, which of these are most important, and then definitely prioritize those, work through those once we start getting to 1.3, and then have all of the other ones be, nice to haves, and if we get done with the top of the list, we can move through to the bottom. So definitely open to feedback on those as well. So user experience issues, we've talked about a lot today. We're going to get as many in as we can as they get fixed, but I think having this special release to get them done is going to be great for us. Developer experience issues are kind of in the same boat, where if you're building modules, themes, or layouts for Backdrop and you find something really weird going on, we should document it, figure out why it's weird, how to make it less weird, and if any of those changes can be included for the current version of Backdrop without API change. I think we should prioritize those as well. I know, Wes, you created a whole long list of things that are really weird when creating themes. Sometimes they're just bugs. We should fix them. Sometimes there's just weird things in our theme system. I noticed that too. I was working on trying to get a pre-process function for a theme hook suggestion to run without a template for the theme hook suggestion, and that made me really grumpy because I didn't need a different template file, but in order to get the pre-process function to run, you needed it. That was one of my fixes for Radix, and I was like, why isn't it working? And I just realized that that was just a weird thing about how Backdrop works. That might be something that we could fix now just by inserting a function call in a different place that say, hey, you know, if the theme hook suggestion is available, run the preprocess function even if there's no template file, but we'll see. There's also performance implications doing stuff like that, so we might need to do some benchmarking. But I think noting where those things are annoying is very important because everybody who's new to Backdrop is going to run into them too. Everybody who's coming to Backdrop from Drupal has this you know, idea of tools that they use, and if the tools don't work right, I mean, even if they didn't work right in Drupal, that's something we can improve, and I think we should focus on getting that as good as we can, at least in the 1.x version. Zipping right through this. We also have sprints if you're interested in working on any of the issues we talked about today or other issues that are bothering you more than the things we talked about today. We do a little sprint every Thursday afternoon after this meeting. We also are going to be doing some sprints at some upcoming events. There is the Nerd Summit, which is coming up. We're going to try and stick around on Sprint Day and get people working on Backdrop there as well. Anyone doing any other sprints, want us to know about it, let us know. We can throw it in this meeting agenda and talk about it in the future too. But Thursday afternoons in general, if you join us in IRC in our channel Pound Backdrop, we're often there chatting about working on different things in Backdrop. We also have a Reddit if IRC isn't your thing, and hopefully in the future we'll get people communicating on backdropcms.org in one way or another. Not sure yet how that's going to work, whether it's forums or something else, but we'll try and make it easier for people who aren't uber nerds to hang out and chat with us as well. Speaking of upcoming events, DrupalCamp LA was last weekend. I was really sad we weren't able to make it there, but it was a success. It looked like, at least from Twitter, like there were a lot of people, a lot of great talks. I'm looking forward to looking at some of them on video when they get posted. We have the Pacific Northwest Drupal Summit, which is coming up in just over a month. We have Badcamp, which is 2 weeks after that, with our first Backdrop Summit, which is going to be on October 22nd. If you're interested in giving a talk, let us know. We are currently working on getting some cool Backdrop swag together for that. So if you weren't planning on coming, you might change your mind when you see our adorable dragon stuff. So that'll be really fun. We've got DrupalCamp Ohio is also that same week. I'm not sure if there's a way we could work together with the Backdrop Summit stuff, but I know we're going to try and get some collaboration between DrupalCamp Ohio and Badcamp in other ways. So if they're doing anything on Thursday, that might be fun to kind of set up a hangout or something and work with them as well. All right, I think that's it for today, unless anyone has any other questions or comments. I'm sorry, Nate couldn't be here. I think I said he wasn't feeling super well. But we are totally on track for the upcoming release and very excited about telling everyone about 1.2 with rich text and core. So I'm gonna go ahead and drop off the call then, and I guess we can see you guys in IRC. Thanks everyone for joining today, and for those of you watching at home, and for those of you who watch later. So happy Thursday. Bye everyone.